POV, you control the flow of money between the world's billionaires. The cursor blinks on your screen at 11:43 p.m. You've been staring at the same spreadsheet for 3 hours, tracking wire transfers for a mid-tier hedge fund in Manhattan. It's tedious work, but it pays your rent. Your coffee has gone cold. You're about to close the file when a notification appears in the corner of your monitor. Emergency access request. Executive override. The message includes a conference bridge number and a single line. Join immediately. Do not discuss with anyone. You hesitate for exactly 4 seconds before dialing in. The voice on the other end doesn't introduce itself. We have a situation. Malcolm Hendricks is in surgery. Heart attack. He's the only one with the access codes we need for a settlement due in 41 minutes. If we miss the window, $3.7 billion gets frozen in escrow, and 2 separate deals collapse. You're the only one in the building with the clearance level to access his system. You know Malcolm. He's the chief financial architect for Centaurus Group, the firm that manages cross-border liquidity for 11 of the world's wealthiest individuals. You've never spoken to him directly, but you've watched him move through the office like a man who carries the weight of economies in his briefcase. I'm just a junior analyst, you say. You have a Series 7 license and a master's in international finance. Right now, that makes you the most qualified person we can reach. Malcolm's assistant will walk you through the authentication protocols. You have 38 minutes. The line goes dead except for hold music. Then a woman's voice, tight with controlled panic. Open Malcolm's workstation. Password is Alpha 77 Quebec 99 Hotel. You'll see 3 pending transfers. The Brazil settlement needs to move first, then the Zurich arbitrage, then the Singapore close. Do exactly what I say. Your hands are shaking as you cross the empty office floor. Malcolm's desk is pristine. 3 monitors glow in the darkness. You enter the password. The system unlocks. The first transfer appears, $1.3 billion from a Sao Paulo holding company to a Luxembourg corporate structure. The recipient account belongs to someone you recognize from financial news. One of the 10 richest people on Earth. The transfer has been pending for 6 hours, waiting for Malcolm's biometric confirmation. I need your authorization code, the woman says. You read it off your badge. She enters something on her end. A new prompt appears. Secondary authorization accepted. Execute transfer. Your finger hovers over the enter key. You're about to move more money than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. Do it now, she says. 31 minutes. You press enter. The screen flashes green. $1.3 billion moves across the world in 2.4 seconds. You feel nothing and everything simultaneously. The second transfer loads automatically. By the time you execute the third transfer, your hands have stopped shaking. The woman on the phone says, you just saved 2 companies from defaulting and prevented a liquidity crisis that would have reached the Financial Times by morning. Malcolm will want to speak with you when he's recovered. Don't leave the building. You sit in Malcolm's chair until sunrise. At 6:15 a.m., 3 men in custom suits arrive. They don't knock. The one in the center is older, with silver hair and the kind of calm that comes from owning things most people don't know can be owned. You handle the settlement, he says. It's not a question. You nod. Malcolm is stable. He'll be out for 6 weeks minimum. We need someone to maintain continuity on the primary accounts. You'll be compensated at Malcolm's salary level, prorated daily. You'll report directly to me. Your previous role is already filled. He slides a tablet across the desk. The employment contract is already loaded. The salary line makes your vision blur slightly. It's more than your father earned in his entire career. You'll need to sign an NDA with financial penalties in the 8 figures if breached. You'll also need to relocate to a company apartment in Tribeca within 48 hours. Security protocols. You sign. You don't fully understand what you're agreeing to, but the alternative is going back to your spreadsheet job. And you already know that door is closed. The apartment is on the 47th floor, with views of the Hudson. You own 3 pieces of furniture and a suitcase of clothes. The first week is a blur of access codes, encrypted channels, and phone calls that happen at 3 a.m. because someone in Singapore needs liquidity before markets open. You learned that Malcolm wasn't just moving money. He was maintaining balance. When one billionaire wants to acquire a stake in another's company, you facilitate the neutral ground. When two rival investors are both trying to corner the same commodity market, you structure the financial instruments that keep them from destroying each other. When a family office in Dubai needs to move $400 million without triggering regulatory flags, you know which correspondent banks to route it through. The money itself becomes abstract. You stop thinking in terms of dollars and start thinking in terms of flow. Your job is to keep the channels open, to make sure liquidity moves where it needs to, when it needs to. You're not making decisions about who deserves wealth. You're maintaining the infrastructure that prevents chaos. 3 weeks in, you get your first real test. A Russian oligarch wants to move $800 million out of a Belgian holding company. The transaction is technically legal, but the timing is suspicious. European regulators have been asking questions about his energy investments. If you process the transfer and it later becomes part of a sanctions case, you could be implicated. You call the silver-haired man. His name is Christopher Dahlberg. He's never told you his title, but you've learned he's on the board of 4 major banks and advises sovereign wealth funds. What's your concern? He asks. You explain the regulatory risk. He's quiet for 7 seconds. The transfer is structured through proper channels. Our compliance team has cleared it. Your job is to execute, not to make policy decisions. If you're not comfortable, I can assign it to someone else, but I need to know if you're capable of managing these accounts. You process the transfer. The money moves. Nothing happens. No regulators call. No news stories break. You realize that your hesitation was based on not understanding how power actually works at this level. The rules that govern ordinary financial transactions don't quite apply the same way up here. Not because they're being broken, but because the people you work for helped write them. By month 2, you're handling 12 primary accounts. You know the personal assistants of 4 billionaires by voice. You've learned to recognize the patterns. Tech fortunes want growth and liquidity. Old wealth wants preservation and discretion. New Asian money wants access to Western corporate structures. Middle Eastern sovereign funds want New York real estate and European bonds. You facilitate all of it. $1 billion here to buy out a competitor, $2 billion there to fund a hostile takeover, $500 million to settle a quiet divorce before it reaches the tabloids. You're not making these decisions. You're just the mechanism. But you're learning that being the mechanism gives you a kind of power that's invisible but real. One night, you're moving funds for a settlement between 2 rival investors. Both men have been fighting over control of a telecommunications company. The settlement requires precise timing. 200 million moves from account A to account B at exactly the same moment that 400 million in convertible bonds transfers back. You notice something. Account B has a secondary transfer queued for 17 minutes after the settlement. 600 million moving to a Cayman structure. If you delay the primary settlement by 20 minutes, that secondary transfer will miss its window, and the entire deal structure collapses differently. Account B loses leverage. Account A wins the telecommunications fight. You can make that delay happen. A small authentication error, a compliance flag that requires manual review. 20 minutes. You don't do it. You execute the transfers exactly as structured, but you file the knowledge away. You saw the leverage point, you understood how to use it. That awareness changes something in you. Malcolm returns in week 11. He's lost weight and moves carefully. You brief him in his office, expecting to be rotated back to normal duties. Instead, he listens to your summary and nods slowly. Christopher says you have good instincts. The Zurich group wants someone to manage their cross-Atlantic positions. It's a step up in complexity. Interested? The Zurich group represents old European wealth, families whose money predates the world wars. They don't invest like the new billionaires. They think in generations. Your job would be maintaining the infrastructure that keeps their wealth hidden, protected, and productive across jurisdictions that all have different legal definitions of ownership. The salary is higher. The apartment is bigger. The stress is exponentially worse. You take the position. By month 6, you're operating at a level where you understand how wealth really works. It's not about having money. It's about controlling the systems through which money moves. The billionaires you serve don't keep their wealth in bank accounts. They keep it in structures, trusts, foundations, holding companies nested inside other holding companies across 12 jurisdictions. Your job is knowing which structure to activate when they need liquidity and which structure to hide behind when they need protection. You make a mistake in month 7. A transfer to a UK property trust gets flagged by an automated compliance system. It's a minor issue, easily resolved, but it delays the transaction by 6 hours. Those 6 hours cause a secondary deal to miss its closing window. The client loses $30 million in acquisition costs. Christopher calls you at 2 a.m. His voice is level, which is somehow worse than anger. That mistake cost a client $30 million and damaged a relationship we've spent 8 years building. You're talented, but talent without precision is a liability. Don't let it happen again. You don't sleep for 3 days. You implement new verification protocols. You build redundancy into every step. The mistake never repeats, but the fear of it stays with you. By month 9, you're managing 17 accounts. You know things about the global financial system that most banking regulators don't. You know which banks are overextended on commercial real estate. You know which tech billionaire is quietly liquidating positions because he needs cash for a divorce settlement. You know which Middle Eastern fund is about to make a major play in African infrastructure. This knowledge is dangerous. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a practical one. If you shared any of it with a journalist or a regulator, you'd collapse billions in market value. You'd also violate NDAs that would leave you financially destroyed and likely imprisoned. So you keep the secrets. You move the money. You maintain the system. In month 10, something shifts. A client asks you to structure a transaction that's technically legal, but designed specifically to exploit a gap between US and EU tax law. The transaction will save him $80 million in taxes by routing profits through 3 jurisdictions in a specific sequence. Your firm's tax attorneys have blessed it. It's allowable, but you know it's exactly the kind of structure that gets legislation written against it after a scandal. If it becomes public, it looks like theft from taxpayers, even though it's perfectly legal. You structure it anyway, because your job isn't to make moral judgments. Your job is to serve the client within the bounds of law. That night, you sit in your Tribeca apartment looking at the skyline and realize you've become something you didn't plan to become. You're not a criminal. You haven't broken laws, but you're part of a machine that operates in the space between what's legal and what's fair. You've helped people with more money than they could spend in 100 lifetimes protect that money from being used for anything other than their own interests. You could quit. You've saved enough money to live comfortably for years. But you also know that quitting doesn't change the system. Someone else would take your role within a day. The machine doesn't stop because one operator walks away. And if you're honest with yourself, you're good at this. You're very good at it. You've built something here. A reputation. Access. Knowledge. You're 29 years old, and you have the private phone numbers of people who move markets with their decisions. In month 11, a journalist contacts you. You don't know how they got your name. They're working on a story about offshore wealth structures. They ask if you'd be willing to talk, even off the record. You don't respond. You forward the email to Christopher. 2 hours later, the journalist's editor receives a call from a law firm that represents 3 Fortune 100 companies. The story dies. You never hear from the journalist again. You realize this is how the system protects itself. Not through conspiracy or violence, but through lawyers and leverage and the quiet application of pressure. By month 12, you're earning more than you imagined possible. You've moved to a larger apartment. You hired a personal assistant. You fly business class to Zurich twice a month. Your family thinks you're a financial consultant. They don't ask detailed questions and you don't volunteer information. You've also stopped sleeping well. You dream about transfers that fail, about regulatory raids, about seeing your name in headlines. The stress is constant and low grade. You manage it with exercise and expensive whiskey and telling yourself that what you're doing is just work. One evening, you're processing a routine transfer when you notice something unusual. One of your clients, a tech billionaire worth $43 billion, is quietly moving money into a completely different kind of structure. Not investments, not acquisitions, something that looks like preparation for a scenario where normal banking systems don't function. You don't ask questions, you execute the transfers, but you file the information away. People at this level don't move money randomly. They know things. They plan for contingencies that ordinary people don't consider. 3 months later, there's a banking crisis in Europe. Two major institutions fail. Markets panic. Your client's unusual structure suddenly makes sense. He was preparing, he knew, or suspected, or hedged against the possibility. You start paying attention to the patterns differently. Not just executing transfers, but understanding why they're happening. You're learning to read the future by watching how the wealthiest people position their assets. This makes you more valuable. It also makes you more complicit, because now you're not just maintaining the system. You're beginning to understand it deeply enough to see the larger consequences. In month 18, Christopher offers you a partnership track. It comes with equity in the firm, a seat at decision-making tables, and responsibilities that extend beyond execution into strategy. You accept because you've come too far to go back to ordinary work. Because you're good at this. Because the alternative is pretending you don't know what you know, and that seems impossible now. The partnership ceremony is quiet. No celebration. Just signatures and handshakes in a conference room that overlooks Central Park. You're 29 years old. You're a partner in a firm that manages liquidity for some of the most powerful people on earth. Your role expands. You're not just processing transfers anymore. You're advising on structure. When a client wants to make a major acquisition, you help design the financial architecture. When two clients have conflicting interests, you find the neutral ground. When someone needs to move $1 billion without leaving traces that regulators can follow, you know the paths. You become essential, not irreplaceable, because no one is irreplaceable at this level, but valuable enough that your departure would cause complications. You've also become isolated. You can't talk about your work with friends. You can't date casually because you're constantly aware of security protocols. Your social circle has narrowed to other people in similar roles, people who understand the weight of knowing too much. On your 30th birthday, you're alone in your office at midnight, processing a transfer for a client in Singapore. $400 million, moving from one structure to another to avoid a regulatory reporting requirement that would trigger public disclosure of acquisition still months away from announcement. The transfer executes. The money flows. The system continues. You look at your reflection in the dark window. You barely recognize the person you've become. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet accumulation of compromises, rationalizations, and decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. You're not a villain. You haven't hurt anyone directly. You've just helped people who already have everything protect what they have. You've maintained a machinery that keeps wealth concentrated and mobile and largely invisible. You could still walk away, but you know you won't. Because this is who you are now. This is what you're good at. This is the world you've chosen, or the world that's chosen you. And the distinction doesn't matter anymore. The phone rings. Dubai. Another transfer. Another client. Another night of moving money between people who will never worry about rent or healthcare or retirement. You answer the call. You pull up the account. You verify the credentials. You execute the transfer. The system continues. The money flows. And somewhere in the machinery of global wealth, you've become another essential component. Not powerful yourself, but powerful in your function. Not wealthy beyond measure, but wealthy enough to be comfortable. Not free, but compensated well enough that freedom seems like a question for people with different problems. The cursor blinks on your screen. The transfer confirmation appears. You have 7 more to process before sunrise. You get back to work.